Good afternoon or evening, depending on which part of the world you're joining us from. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to LSE SU India Forum 2021 Media Panel Discussion. My name is Hiba Khan and I will serve as your co-moderator for this session. LSE is recognized for its media studies all over the world, and today our goal is to cover some of the pertinent issues concerning the Indian media and what lies ahead for this industry. This is in line with the main theme of our conference, Embrace the Change. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone on the LIF team, which has organized this massive conference in these testing times. The LSE India Forum has an enduring legacy for serving as the largest student-led India-centric conference in the UK. And this year, we are proud to provide both international and domestic students an avenue to engage with truly inspirational Indian personalities from various industries. Speaking of inspirational Indian personalities, I would now like to introduce our esteemed and celebrated panel for the day. To begin with, Ms. Arfa Khanum Sherwani, Senior Editor of TheWire.in. Having won various awards for her exceptional work in the past 20 years, Ms. Khanum is an instrumental voice in the Indian media today. Her coverage of the Afghan and Iranian presidential elections and her fearless voice concerning very many prevalent social, economic, and political issues in the country are testaments to the fact that she's a true inspiration for young Indians, especially women who wish to work in this industry. We are glad you could join us. Mr. Akash Banerjee, social and political satirist, independent journalist, and YouTuber. The Deshbhakt, as he's popularly known, is credited to be a game changer in how the youth of India consumes news. Mr. Banerjee keeps news to millions of his viewers absolutely real, unfiltered, and simplified. And that is why we couldn't have found a better panelist for our discussion today. Dr. Nitasha Kaul, London-based academic, novelist, and a poet. Over the last 2 decades, she has researched on themes including democracy, political economy, rise of right-wing nationalism, feminism, feminist, and post-colonial critiques. Currently, she's an associate professor in politics and international relations at the University of Westminster in London. We are grateful to have you with us today. Mr. Vikram Chandra, founder, editorg.com, and former CEO, NDTV Group. A face kids of the 2000s grew up watching every evening, especially as the anchor of the big fight. We are honored to have you join us for this discussion. Mr. Chandra's extensive work at NDTV included covering war as well as the World Economic Forum, interviewing leaders like King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, Bill Gates, Rupert Murdoch, Tim Cook, and Al Gore. Presently, he's the head of Editor G, a video news platform. Thank you for your time today. And finally, our moderator for this exciting discussion, Dr. Ram Bhatt. Dr. Bhatt is a fellow at the Department of Media and Communications at LSE. His current research interests are to do with links between communicative infrastructure, politics, and subjectivation in the global south. Dr. Bhatt is also presently working on a book on online hate speech. We understand you're currently doing your research work in India, and we are grateful you took time out to moderate this discussion. One last thing before I hand it over to Dr. Bhatt, some housekeeping notes. We aim to have Dr. Bhatt moderate this discussion for about an hour, and then we will open up the floor to audience questions for another 20 to 30 minutes. We want to make this session as interactive as we virtually can, so the audience can send in questions through the chat window, which I will constantly monitor and pick out the most relevant ones. If you have a question targeted towards a specific panelist, please mention their name. You may send in your questions at any time during the discussion. In this virtual meetup, there is a chance that internet may play a spoil sport. Rest assured, our logistics team will resolve any connectivity problems from our end as quickly as possible. If any of our panelists face an issue in between the session, kindly let us know. And finally, a recorded version of this webinar will be available. Now, without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Ram Bhatt.
Thanks, Hiba, and thanks to the Student Union's India Forum Society for inviting me. It's my pleasure to moderate this session, and I really hope that we can discuss some of these issues in depth. As I understand it, we have three broad themes ahead of us to discuss. One is misinformation and hate speech and freedom of speech of the press. The other is what kind of things determine the priorities of coverage. And finally, talking about the impact of social media on politics. Now, not only is the depth and scope of these topics a difficult thing to discuss in itself, the panel is equally diverse and comes from different contexts. So I hope we can have sufficient time to discuss all of these, and I hope that you will also participate as audience by asking your questions. So what I thought I'll do is I'll open it up by asking each of the panelists to give brief remarks. But if I may, I would ask each of you a small kind of addendum question, because I thought in tackling misinformation and freedom of speech issues, nothing better than to kick off the discussion with the new IT rules 2021, which have just been notified, and there's obviously been some discussion around it. But what I thought is I'll ask each of you to just talk from your own perspective. Now, Arfa, I believe that the Wire has filed suit in the Delhi High Court. I believe the Quint also has. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about your intervention in that PIL. And also, if I could ask Vikram to talk about this internal rift which seems to have emerged between traditional media which have a digital publishing and digital only websites. So I believe the ministry has decided to hold off on traditional media which have also a digital presence. So Akash and Arfa might be, impacted in a different way than, let's say, NDTV or, but your own startup editor G might also be impacted in a different way. So if you all could touch upon these things. And Nitasha, I just wanted to ask you to give a slightly broader perspective on how 2020 has been a difficult year for disinformation and linked to it freedom of expression, including the attacks on journalists, specifically in Kashmir. And the case of Asif Sultan, who's still in jail, comes to mind for reporting on Burhan Wani's, killing in 2016, and the photojournalist Masrat, who was booked. So I don't know, that internet shutdown seems to have been opened up after Biden came to power, but there's also that infrastructural kind of censorship on the whole. So if you could touch upon some of those themes, I'd be really grateful. So having said that, I don't know what order you would like to start off, but if you could give some opening remarks, then we'll take it from there. Maybe Arfa, you can start first.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy and I'm feeling privileged to be speaking from this very prestigious platform. Also to share this with the people and journalists whose work I have been following and I've been an admirer of. I would like to say something on media freedom, and then we'll also come to what exactly the new so-called IT rules are going to do. And the chilling effect we are already feeling. And as you said, the wire has already moved to the court, and we feel that this is like one final, the last nail I feel in the coffin would be these IT rules. So there was already a very serious assault, I would say nothing less than a war on India's independent media, free media, and which is now, such a small minority, I would say more than 90% of the media has already moved to the darker side. So, and that is why people like me, who've been doing journalism for the last 20 years, all of a sudden we, people like me, stand out because we continue to do, and trust me, I'm not doing anything extraordinary. This is very regular journalism that I've been doing for the last 20 years. It is just that the majority of the journalists have switched over to the darker side. That is why people like me, we stand out, that we are still asking questions of the government, from the government, and we are still raising concerns of the marginalized communities. But just to give you, and also your international audience, a kind of an idea what it is to be an Indian journalist, an Indian political journalist reporting from the national capital of the largest democracy of the world, which sadly the world is now saying that it is partly free and also electoral autocracy. I mean, this breaks my heart when I'm saying this. It doesn't give me any pleasure to recognize this, that I'm someone who's been advocating India's model, the structure of democracy, and how we have established a true diverse society. All over the world, I've gone and delivered lectures, and now there's a complete loss of face when I speak to my counterparts in other countries, that I don't know, how to really kind of argue in favor of India's democracy. So I'm saying this whole free speech and assault on this, from say investigative agencies to say police FIRs to threats online and offline. Like I'll tell you, I'm someone who was born and brought up in Uttar Pradesh, and when I now go to Uttar Pradesh, I'm warned and alerted, and my family members, they would call me and say, please take care of yourself. And if it's absolutely necessary, then you should go. And I'm someone, as you said in your introduction, I've reported from Iran, from Iraq, from Afghanistan. I have reported from Kashmir, but I have never felt more unsafe than sitting in New Delhi. For my colleagues and me, myself, we went to Northeast Delhi to cover Delhi riots. And my colleagues are checking on me and I'm checking on them when they are going, whether they are safe, because we've had attacks in New Delhi on journalists who were covering riots, and not just while the riots were breaking out, but even much after that. Reporters from some digital websites, they were attacked. So I'm just trying to say that our constitution says that we have freedom of speech. Government of India on different platforms, they say that we are still a democracy, and we can exercise all these rights. But when it comes to practically exercising this freedom of speech, this is, and the new IT rules, as I said, this is just the last nail in the coffin. Trust me, the chilling effect it has, because now the government is going to define what they think is news. They are going to decide what can be categorized and defined as news. So, for example, if I say that if I went to Hathras and I say this, I must remember our fellow journalist Siddiq Kappan, who still remains in jail. He was out for a couple of weeks to see his mother. I'm not sure whether he's already gone back to jail, but this was like a couple of weeks kind of a window which was given to him because his mother was seriously ill. And since October until now, this poor man remains in jail because he wanted to report, not that he did not even reach the site. So I'm just trying to tell you that how difficult it is and how unsafe, journalism in India has become, I would say, a very dangerous profession. And for people like me, we don't even know any other thing. Like even if I want to leave tomorrow and I say that I don't feel safe enough and I want to lead a normal life, I don't know what else to do. This is what all I've been doing for the last 20 years. So just to give you a few examples, which I wrote down, that what happened before we come to the new IT rules and the kind of chilling effect it has on journalists and journalism in India. So in the just last week of January 2021, right after January 26th, there was this protest which is still going on by the farmers. So this was completing 2 months of demonstration by farmers. There was an FIR filed on 6 journalists and very senior editor-ranked journalists, including Rajdeep Sardesai, Mrinal Pandey, and some others. And there was this freelance journalist called Mandeep Punia. He was literally dragged away from a farmers' protest site on Delhi's outskirts on the evening of January 30th. And he literally spent more than 3 days in jail. He was beaten up ruthlessly. And this journalist, he wrote down, because he was not given even a pen and paper in jail. And he said, even if I'm sent to jail, I'm going to report from jail. And he wrote the names of the farmers and some quotes on his legs. This is how he's reporting. So as I said, this is the worst time to be a journalist in India, but also the best time, because the government realizes that when they have already, kind of bought over, or I would say kind of, made these journalists pliant and have been able to secure favorable coverage for themselves, these are the only 5-7% people, or maybe less, who are still kind of giving, a counter theory, a factual theory to what government wants us to believe. So anything which you say against the government's own official narrative is now considered seditious, it's considered anti-national, and journalists like me are now in front of the common people. So I'm saying it is not just about the government. Even a lot of people from the support network of the ruling party BJP, they portray people like me as enemy of not just the state, but enemy of the people. There was a YouTube video, and at least two people in this panel were profiled in that video. There was like a random YouTuber who said people like me and Akash, Banerjee, and a half a dozen other people should be hanged. Those calls were made through this video, and this was tweeted by all the right-wing network, and including the state-sponsored, I would say state-supported news websites. So not just this FIR, but the Wire's reporter Ismat Ara and one of our founding editors Siddharth Vadrajan, they were named in an FIR for what? Because they reported from the side of the victim's family. So during this 26th January parade by the farmers, there was one farmer who died, and the issue is still contentious. Like, we have no clarity. The government, the police say whatever they want us to believe, but our job as journalists who have been around for a while, we've always told stories and this is our responsibility as journalists to tell both sides of the story. So government is free to do whatever they want to say. The police can publicly, of course, tell their stories. We will also report about that. But it is our duty. We are duty bound to also report what the victim's family is saying. So just because of reporting this, there's an FIR on our reporter, young reporter, 22-year-old, this girl it is her first job, one of the first stories that she's doing, and also on our founding editor. But then, and after that, then there was this whole, Twitter, I would say, uproar by some international celebrities who expressed their open support for farmers. So I think that what the government at the moment, when they do not want to face this international embarrassment, and they realize that even after having, state power, so much of legal authority and legal power, and this whole almost occupation on majority of the media, within 1 year, from December 2019 to now December 2020, and until now it's March, there have been one of the largest historic public movements. So now they're thinking that what to do with it, how to make people believe their theory, and how to make people believe whatever is being done to them is for their betterment. So I think these are the only remaining few defenders, dissenters, journalists, this extraordinary role now given to us. We were very regular, ordinary journalists, but the times, I would say, time is such that now we become extraordinary because we are one of those very few people. So they don't know how to handle this. So they're thinking maybe just shooting and controlling the messenger, because they feel that why there are so many people out on the streets, protesting against CAA, then protesting against the farm laws, despite this almost complete blanket control over every source of information. And that is why now finally they're thinking that they are not able to do this. And the new IT rules now will define whether we can report on farmers, whether we can report on laborers, whether we can report on the atrocities on Dalits, whether we can report on this whole anti-minority, violence. While I'm saying this, there is so much tension that is being reported from this, region, from the city called Ghaziabad, which is not far away from national capital. Like, I can go from where I'm sitting within, say, 45 minutes, I can reach there. That's a part of NCR, National Capital Region. There is so much of tension in Dasna village of Ghaziabad because there was a Muslim boy who went to a temple to get some water. He was mercilessly beaten up. And there was, of course, sympathy wave for this guy, this little boy. And now there is so much of tension because there is a pushback that, this should not be allowed. So just to give you an idea that this is just to control the whole narrative, that now the government will tell us what we can report on, who we can write about, if they will allow our pens to move and our cameras to roll or not. So I think this is a final acknowledgement of the journalism that we've been doing in the past 7 years, that this has been pro-people. And as by design, journalists should be anti-establishment, and we've been anti-establishment. I would take it as a compliment on my journalism and the journalism done by The Wire and other, so-called alternate media platforms. So I really want to challenge this, that we are not alternate, we are mainstream, because we represent the majority of Indian people. We represent the farmers, the laborers, the minorities, women, Dalits, tribals. So we are the new mainstream. Those people who exclude 90%, 85% of Indian population are not mainstream. So I think even this is a is the realization, I would say, from the government of India. This is a seal, a stamp from the government that we are the real mainstream media, and they feel we are the greatest and the most serious challenge that they have.
Thanks, Arfa. Could I request Akash, because I think Arfa mentioned chilling effect a couple of times, and as a YouTube creator, as a satirist, perhaps you would be able to flesh out what exactly this chilling effect would look like.
So first and foremost, Arfa has already landed herself up with 1 or 2 FIRs already. She's mentioned that she's scared. You can't say that in New India. You can be scared, but you can't say it. If you say it, then there'll be a case that how dare you say it. So that is the situation, and that is the funny state of affairs that we are living in, that you can be scared, you can be browbeaten, you can be blackmailed, you can be legislated upon, but you're not supposed to say anything because everything is great. So when there is an international review that says that India is struggling as far as uh, uh, malnutrition is concerned, you have the whole report being ripped apart in parliament, being told that even dogs are fed here. I'm pretty sure dogs are fed here, but we are talking about human beings, which of course we are competing with Pakistan as far as the human resource index is concerned, or poverty indexes, hunger index is concerned. And with Bangladesh, we are fighting with per capita GDP. The thing that has happened is, and why we are seeing this chilling effect, is the narrative has completely slipped. So while it is fear that is being given and the chill that is being given, the fact of the matter is that the narrative is slipping, and it's the chills as far as the government is concerned that they are feeling. I'll give you an example. You have people, you have the former CEO of NDTV sitting here. Now, when a former CEO of the NDTV leaves, end of story, kitna kar loge digital mein? Here is a powerful network. What can you do? I was vice president at Radio Mirchi. They said, you're crazy to think of going and opening a YouTube channel. Wire has been joked upon. Arey, ye to band ho jayega. It will shut down. It's a matter of months, it will shut down. So from jokes, you have the entire national media with you, the print is with you, media is pliable. Let's not even go about how much the media is abused. I put out one tweet about abusing the mainstream media and it'll get 500 retweets to 1,000 minimum, eyes closed. So what happened? You had the media, you had thousands of crores of rupees, you had the IT cell, you had the not the best, the loudest of anchors, and yet you are legislating against small independent websites. What happened to that confidence? What happened to the overarching game plan that you had, whereby every narrative would be weaved by you? Now, small little independent websites that are publicly funded are creating problems for you. So that is first and foremost a victory for alternative media, which Arfa rightly is saying is that is the mainstream media now. So first and foremost, let's be very clear about it, that digital media has become the mainstream, at least as far as narrative setting is concerned, at least as far as exposing the mainstream media is concerned, at least as far as putting out the alternatives theory, the story that the government doesn't want to be projected. So besides the international media, which the government very easily wants to say that, oh, it's all George Soros, you have the digital media, which is the problem. So digital media becoming the main narrative force. So that's one. Now let's go to the pettiness of the government when we're talking about the new social media regulations. Hypothetically, I'm like, okay, let me give them the benefit of doubt. Everything needs regulation. Even the mainstream media is under regulation. So news outlets need to have some sort of regulation. Big social media companies need to have some sort of regulation. So they have something called a grievance officer. They have something who's going to liaison with the government. One person who's always going to be on tap, where the government says, take this off. What is this? Give me information. Okay, I'm still willing to believe. I'm nationalist, you see. Very, very, very. I'm passionately believing what the government is trying to do. I put out one simple question. Is there any working democracy in the world where a YouTuber has to fill compliances, has to have a grievance officer, has to respond to grievances, has to become part of some sort of a digital forum or where complaints against a YouTuber is taken up. Nowhere. I researched, I asked, I haven't come across any functioning democracy. Unless until we are considering Russia as a democracy, that would be a good template of where we are heading. So now, not only is small independent websites and news outlets are a problem, consider the wording. Anybody who's engaged in news slash current affairs slash economic commentary and cultural commentary. When you put current affairs, you're basically completely silencing what? Not breaking news, not even Hathras, not even farmers' protest. You want to kill any sort of conversation. So please understand this new social media rule is much, and they are saying, no, no, we are basing it on the European system. It's all crap. They are basing it on the authoritarian system of maybe China or Russia. That is the only comparison that you can get, where current affairs, if anybody is discussing, they have to have a grievance officer. And the purpose that you will submerge these guys with paperwork. You will submerge these guys with complaints, that they will fill their days and nights doing duplicate, triplicate forms, something that we thought we had left behind in the 60s and 70s. It's basically license Raj coming down to digital age. That is what is happening at this point of time. And we've already seen the chilling effect in other things. We all know what happened to Pratap Bhanu Mehta. That's also a concurrent thing that is happening. Piece by piece, brick by brick, people who are speaking out. Remember, earlier it was opposition mukt. So after it was opposition mukt, then it was media hamara. So media also hamara. Now it is individual. Now, for the largest democracy in the world, individuals being targeted is really, really pathetic. Laws are being framed. Oh, such and such person is an OIC, overseas Indian citizen, overseas citizen of India, OCI, and cannot hold in editor's position. So and so lawyer cannot take money. So let's amend the FCRA provisions. That is the pettiness with which it has gone down to, where laws are being tweaked to silence particular individuals, individual YouTubers, and basically small outlets. So that's the level to which the attempted chill has gone down to. The question here is, as Arfa was saying, two of the largest protests have happened. Now, it's basically who blinks first. Now they are saying, okay, this has happened. I need to shut down everything. So we will shut down digital also. Will another protest happen after that? Or we would head China's way? So that remains to be seen at this point of time. But as I have said also, that this is, I mean, in terms of academia also, it is, and digital media also, it's the Nirbhaya moment. It's either going to go this way or that way. Either it's going to stop mattering at all, and anything and everything can be done, or there would be some sort of a pushback. My only and last submission is that, is there a genuine pushback by the people? Arfa can do what she wants to do. Vikram can try to do what he wants to do. The Deshbhakt can try to do satire. We don't even do news, we do satire. But if tomorrow we are shut down or arrested, is there going to be any sort of a pushback? Is there going to be some sort of an upheaval? Is the government going to be forced to take back? Maybe, but I am not living in that false hope. Because one has to completely understand is that the kind of people who are supporting a wire or us are in the minority. There is only a small fraction of people who want genuine good journalism, and there is a lot of good journalism. Sometimes it amazes me, as a former mainstream media guy who spent 10 years in television, sometimes I look at the quality of work that is happening on digital media is fabulous. And I'm not just talking about wire. There are many others. But who's reading? Who's consuming? Who's passionately advocating? Who's passionately subscribing and paying money? And who's revolting? I think we've had more revolt over ripped jeans than the ripped state of journalism and the ripped state of legislation that happens here. So we need to outrage more on the better things. We need to and see where we are going, because beyond a certain point of time, you're seeing that everything is collapsed. Jobs, economy, state of society, international reputation of India. There is nothing left to. Now the question is, are people going to wake up or not?
Thanks, Akash. Vikram, may I request you to go next and address some of these issues, but also bring in your experience as a broadcaster and the CEO of NDTV? Thanks.
Well, I really don't want to talk too much about the former company that I was at. I just, we've heard very impassioned statements from Arfa and from Akash both. I just want to place some of this in a slightly larger context, right? So the first question is, having worked for 25 years in television news, why did I become convinced that television news is now beyond redemption almost? Why is it that I almost felt that there's no point in even trying to fix TV news? Because, and I'll tell you the reason for that. There's a fundamental problem with the business model of television news and the way television news is structured, and that has aided the deterioration. I'm telling you, and then I'll talk about the digital rules also in just a couple of minutes, but if I could just talk about the first theme, because it's really something that I've spent a lot of time sort of brainstorming and trying to understand why did this happen. Now, yes, you can point a finger at the government and say the government has done X and the government has done Y, and yes, that is true. But I think the decay in television news in particular had started earlier. And let's be very clear on that why did it happen? And when I've analyzed this is the answer that I have come to. And that's one of the reasons why I said I quit and I said I'm going to do something completely different. In India, television news, and I'm going to really target TV news a little bit, and that's because it's something which I came from. I understand it really well. I spent a lot of time there. And actually, if you think about it, I don't think it's fair to tarnish print with the same brush as sometimes people attack TV news with. Print still does write strong editorials. Print does write a lot. You pick up your newspapers today, you are seeing a lot that is being written out there. What Arfa was saying that, if you read the editorials that are coming out on a day-to-day basis in print, they're there. There's some strong writing out there. Indian Express had an editorial about Pratap Bhanu Mehta and other things just yesterday. So what's the problem with television? Let me just take you through that step by step. In India, unlike in many other countries, television news channels do not get subscription money. Distribution is not a revenue source, right? So instead of getting subscription money, you're paying people carriage fees. So you're dependent entirely on advertising. And when you are dependent entirely on advertising, and advertising has to pay not just for your cost, but also pay for the amount that you're paying cable operators, it means that's all you've got to bet on. And where do you get advertising? You get advertising from TRPs, right? Now, where do the TRPs come from? So that's the first part of it. To make any money in television, you've got to get TRPs. Problem number one. TRPs, we've been hearing about some of the issues around the TRP system and fraud and other things. Maybe that's also there, but let's set that aside. Whether that is true or not, it is certainly true that TRPs come from 40,000 boxes in a country of 1.3 billion people. And as a result of that minuscule, tiny sample, 40,000 boxes measuring that many people, and those have to measure not just English, but Hindi, but Tamil, but Kannada, but everything else. It means that system is very easy to game, and B, by nature of that small sample size, what's eventually happening is tabloid content, hysterical content, opinionated content, yelling, shouting, screaming, playing to the gallery, playing to the populism, playing to, as Akash said, this is what the majority view is. You have to cater to that because that's how you will get your TRPs. That is where the fundamental problem came from. That's where the problem originated from. And it's not just now. It's not just started in the last 5 years or 6 years. It started earlier, but it has got accelerated. And it's got accelerated to a point where everybody feels you've got to play to that gallery. So that's the first fundamental issue. And then you're driving everybody into saying digital, but digital has its own problems, especially when it comes to video. On text, whether it's a wire, whether it's other forms, they have the solution to it. But in video has not found the form factors, it has not found the user experience, it has not found the method in which you can YouTube, yes, to some extent, but how do you communicate, how do you connect, how do you take on television? That is an unsolved problem. Even today, it's an unsolved problem. But part of the reason why I set up this company was to try and find the solutions that how do you take on television and how do you take on TV news? Because I don't think TV news can easily be fixed for other reasons also. It's not just government and government control and other things. And by the way, that extension to some of the other problems that are there, I mean, Arfa and Akash have spoken very vociferously. I don't want to repeat anything that they've said, but some of the problems around what people are facing, the issues, it's a broader question, I think, that we are facing here on the entire question of individual rights and civil liberties and that. And it's not just restricted to journalists and to others. I mean, like, if you look at, and again, some of these things, an acceleration of trends that have happened. Look at the number of people who've been locked up as under trials, don't get bail. And this entire concept of bail, not jail, and the fact that are the courts doing enough to step up to defend liberty? At the end of the day, governments, people, and it's not just the central government, it's the central government, it's the state government, it's district officials, it's the policeman in some little Mofassil town who has the ability to pick up a journalist or pick up somebody writing that person and lock that person up. The only defense you have against that is you have to have the ability to go to the judiciary, you have to have the ability to go and say, look, I'm a journalist, I'm somebody, I'm doing my job. I need you to protect me. I need you to make sure that that is being protected. And if you don't get that protection, it's going to be something that is going to continue to haunt us. And it's not just going to happen at the central government level. Every state government, every district official, every police officer will feel empowered to do that. Because at the end of the day, and Arfa knows this, and Akash knows this, and Nitasha, all of us know this. At the end of the day, why is it that journalists and others need special protection? It's because it's the job of the journalist to be talking back to power. And again, not just at big government level. It's the ability to go to your district magistrate and think something wrong is happening. It's the ability to go to a thanedar in the interiors of Jharkhand or the interiors of Chhattisgarh to say, this SHO is doing something wrong. And if that SHO can pick up that journalist, it's not going to ever make the headlines. It's not going to be coming to the forefront. But if that SHO can pick up that journalist and lock that journalist up, and that journalist is not going to get paid because the local sessions court is not complying, that's also a really serious problem that I think all of us have to try and confront. It will not make the headlines, it will not make TV news, but it's again a fundamental problem. And so the answer to the first part of what I was saying is a business model question that I don't know whether television has the answer to. And the problem to the second one is somehow we've got to enable the judiciary to stand up and to stand firm. And Arfa, just a thought that I'm placing before you and placing others, especially those who are going and talking about this. Let's try and find positive solutions to this, right? We know what the issues are. Even in the digital rules and the new bodies that are being set up, maybe there are solutions. Maybe, and I've been sort of racking my brains and saying, how do you find answers to some of these problems? Maybe the solution is people who are accredited journalists, accredited media organizations, whoever they are, you cannot file FIRs against them, cases against them, charge sheets against them, or arrest a journalist without first going to that body. So if you do want to set up a supervisory body, right? Let's say that's what the government is saying, we need to control this, we need to regulate this. So we're going to set up a body. And all journalists and all digital bodies and everyone has to report into this body, and that body is going to do it. Maybe you take it one step forward then. You say, all right, fine, you're setting up this body. Let's get a Supreme Court judge in. Let's get Justice Lokur to come in and head that body. But here's the flip side. Here's the quid pro quo. You set up that body, let journalists report into that body, and that body can see what journalists are doing. But the flip side is no using other laws and random complaints and people just filing cases and FIRs and arresting without getting the sanction of this body. As does happen, for example, with government servants into the judiciary and others. You need to get permission before you're going after them. Maybe that's a solution. I'm not saying it's going to necessarily work, but I'm just throwing that into the mix for everyone else to debate.
Thanks, Vikram. I've heard Nitasha speak before, so I think she differs quite substantively in terms of her view. So I'll leave the floor to you, Nitasha. You're on mute. You're on mute.
So not very tech. Yeah, so I speak here not so much as a practitioner, and I will zoom out because I'm not a journalist. However, I occupy a weird kind of middle space that used to be called, that used to be termed as the role of the public intellectual, who's something between the university and the public sphere, and speaking to different kinds of audiences in almost like different languages of thought. So I'm really going to, so the 3 points that we were supposed to talk about and reflect on, I'm going to talk about the first one, the free press, and the third one, the impact of social media and politics, and leave out the coverage prioritization that my co-panelists have so eloquently spoken about. And also, I think part of what I want to do is not just say what's happening, because we all are doing that day in and day out through all of our work, spoken and written, but also like try and reflect on why it's happening. And I think that and in the second part of what I say, I'll refer to Kashmir and to my own experience. So I think that the main important thing here is the role of the media in a democracy, and the fact that there are things that cannot be spoken about. Now, it's really interesting that, every society, obviously, there's the Overton window. There are the things that can't be spoken about. However, what we see is an ever greater number of things that can't be spoken about, right? And this is paralleled, and I notice this because of the different worlds that I move in, that this is paralleled by a kind of a phenomenon where on the right, there is a greater consolidation, a consistency and strategy, and a very meticulous carrying out of what their objectives are seen to be. Whereas I feel like that to those people who want to challenge that and speak truth to power, there are varying kinds of really unnecessary and regrettable fragmentation, which personally I find so problematic. Because one of the things that I want to sort of as subtext urge everyone who's listening to this is to reflect on what actually is purism doing for us. Because every time that I see somebody who's standing up to power in India, you have the idea that, well, they didn't do that 15 years ago, they didn't do that 20 years ago, or they didn't do that 5 years ago, or they're actually not that critical. And I just want to say this is not the time for that. That this is the time for, when the judges are giving the sorts of judgments that they are doing, there's judicial quietude, there's constitutional vandalism, there's media suppression. At this point, I think we should kind of gather these forces that are helpful to us. So be that, and I see that not just with the media, but also with academia, because just like the IT rules work, there's media suppression, there's also the restrictions on what you can teach and what you can speak about and what sorts of things students can research about and who gets to be able to do that research. And so overall, whether it's the media or it's and all of this really interestingly, of course, is also happening. And I think in the Indian case, two really interesting differences from the rest of the world is that it's happening without a transgression of legality. It's happening with a subversion of, so the law is being subverted in the name of the law. It's not like a straightforward system where you're just, you have a dictator who's saying, well, we declare, let's take the simple example, we declare an emergency. That's not what's happening. There is an emergency, it's just not being declared. So the law is being subverted in the name of the law. And secondly, I think what's really different and interesting and super worrying about the Indian case, and worrying is a mild term here, is the organized institutional backing that all of this has. So you have Trump supporters, you have Boris Johnson fans, you have Bolsonaro fans, but you don't have a nationwide paramilitary that's backing the government, that is actually able to, in those small Mufassal towns, on those issues, about those journalists, able to exercise that kind of a force. So I think that this is something different. It's not just any other government that wants to suppress freedom. It's a government that also has an ideological parent in the form of the RSS, which actually has a very clear stated agenda that is not, that is problematic, to say the least. And in the recent, The Wire just did a story, I think earlier in March, on the government recommendations, and it's for those of you who are listening to this and who haven't seen it, please go and check. I think it's early March. It's the story where they go through all of this government ministers' recommendations, and they've highlighted all of the various bits, and they've said why this is problematic and what this tells us. And of course, things like the idea that journalists ought to be color coded, or that people should be identified as being with or against the government, or even just suggestions that they link up with right-wing governments of other countries, and as as people have pointed out, it doesn't even read like a government document. It reads like a party document, which is, a whole different level. So there's this overall thing that's happening multidimensionally, but in which the media has a very important role because of how it can, hold truth, kind of hold people accountable potentially. And the state-centric coverage, the kind of the biggest downside to this is the way in which it decimates thinking in the public sphere. Now, philosophers, have over time reminded us, and Hannah Arendt is now super relevant because of what she spoke about, how totalitarianism is first of all about the failure of thinking in the public sphere. This is not unintentional. This is not just happening. It's all the fact that people aren't able to think critically. The fact that so few people support critical media or critical education is part of an overall structure in which education and critical thinking is sought to be limited. And within that, I think that, and the role of, so this, the second point, which was about the impact of social media on politics, I would say that we saw with the last election, not to mention the amount of money that was spent on the campaigns, but also the fact that elections are gamed. It's all algorithmic. It's how search engines rank information. So partly these are not, again and again, I would say these are not things that are happening for the first time. I mean, I'm thinking of political theorists like Sheldon Walden, who in the 80s pointed out that the microchip has more power than a vote. There's a lot of problem with democracies not actually being substantively democratic, and many of them. But what's happening is the level at which this is happening, and the extent to which this is tying up globally. So it's not really so much, I think this may be an unpopular opinion, but I want to say this isn't just about India, but it's really interesting how the role of the West plays into what's happening in India. Because a key part of how the kind of the followers of the right wing and those who support media suppression support themselves in India, their narrative is that we're kind of historically, we've been denied our place, and we're now this is some kind of post-colonial resurgence. We're going to, this is our speaking back to the West. And this is our form of responding to various kinds of things, ranging from racism to imperialism to all of that thing that we've suffered in the past. So it's the weaponization of history and appeal to a sense of injury that they use. But equally and very problematically, what they are doing, the leaders of these projects and the policies that they enact, what this is doing is also globally very resonant. So it's not just, to us, to me, for instance, who's between these two worlds. In the UK, it's interesting. So, yesterday, one of my colleagues had written about how harming a statue in the UK now, with the current right-wing government here, harming a statue is punishable more than rape. And the first thing that I thought of was, well, of all the years that people have been saying harming cows is the punishment is worse than rape. You have leaders here that are talking about, destroying reports on slavery because they are humiliating us about our past here. So this is a global project that, it's not coincidental that these leaders, these male leaders in these several countries are actually identify resonances with each other. So the idea that there is some kind of international community out there that's going to, kind of the rescue will come from international condemnation, I'm not sure. I mean, yes, of course, there's international condemnation when rankings slip and all of that, but I think it's really important that we see that we are all in this together in different countries, but that in the Indian case, what is worse is the extent and degree of what's happening. And I think that that this is I don't know if I think Ram, if you have worked with Shakuntala there, right? So these people, Ram's colleagues and others, they've worked on the role of WhatsApp in India, the role of various kinds of other media, social media as well, in how public opinion gets formed. And I think that this is, and I see that with with people I interact with, but I think that this is about, to me, about two things. I think this is about the ways in which ignorance is systematically manufactured. So I would draw back to a concept like that we have from this book that I was just recently reading called Agnotology, The Making and Unmaking of Ignorance, by two philosophers of science, Robert Proctor and Londa Schlebinger. And I've just been reflecting on the ways in which it's, there is that historical work that tells us how media is compromised and how consent is manufactured in modern democracies, that kind of work that we know from Chomsky and others. But also more and more, there are more complex strategies of keeping people ignorant through restrictions on education, on laws, on the media, and the toxic nationalist projects are very good at this. And these global similarities to me are interesting. I mean, when I see the ways in which the internet is shut down in India, the internet is shut down for different lengths of time in Kashmir or in other parts of in India or in Iran or in Hong Kong. What are the modalities through which violence is exercised, communication is repressed, all of those things? I think that there's something globally that is happening, of which the Indian case is a part. And the Indian case is actually most worrisome because of the extent to which this is being successful and the violence has been ongoing in the Indian case, but also in the ways in which the Indian case sets an example for other countries. Firstly, through the ways in which other countries kind of see the Indian case and emulate it. And secondly, more directly through the role of right-wing politicians and their alliances and the diaspora Indian politicians in some cases. I mean, we have a home secretary here who's known for those kinds of views here, Preeti Patel. So there's also kind of this role, either individually, institutionally, and ideologically, that the Indian case is performing. So in that sense, India is being a Jagat Guru and showing everyone else about how we can limit, what are the kind of clever ways of limiting accountability, people being able to speak truth to power, and doing this while maintaining the outward facade of a judiciary and some kind of press, and just regulating them in different ways. Lastly, I mean, I think that one of the other things that I want to say is concerns the Kashmir case. So I started. So this is another way in which I'm a curious person for my views on Kashmir, but also for my identity, which of course to people familiar with the context, my second name would immediately tell that I'm not a Kashmiri Muslim. So therefore, speaking about human rights or Islamophobia or the ways in which Kashmir as a political dispute and also with the egregious human rights violations, how all of that gets subsumed and how all of that gets used to feed a kind of very toxic case in the in the Indian imaginary. It's like the old colonial thing, when you kind of do you practice the kinds of violent things at the periphery and then they eventually start to come home. So in the Indian case, it's a bit like that when it happens somewhere distant, and it's actually physically not that distant, but as I've said before, Srinagar could be 1,000,000 miles away from Delhi, and historically for years and years it has been, in terms of how most people think about that place. So and now those things, when they happen, even to a very kind of relatively minor extent in other parts of India, that people aren't able to see those parallels. So in Kashmir, 10 years ago, and I think just over 10 years ago, was the first time that I publicly spoke about it in the aftermath of the 2010 uprising. And I remember since then till this date, it has been like a relentless facing of the worst kinds of abuse and insults. So to my colleagues in the media, I mean, I completely empathize and feel for them, because you have to, you are the public face and you have to feel this every day as part of the work that you do, because they are afraid of the media. And while that gives us some hope, it's also really worrying that it should be like this. So there is a long history of intimidation in the Indian context, and women, and the gendered and misogynist forms of abuse and fear go way back. Not all of this, I agree with people who say, well, all of this doesn't have to do just with the Modi-led BJP government post 2014, because yes, there is kind of a deeply ingrained violent intimidation, practice of intimidation, misogyny, submission. There are structures. There's structural violence, which has always been there. And coming of age within that system as somebody who kind of, for when you stand for the elections of your college president at one of the best colleges in Delhi University, and you get rape and death threats, you kind of know that this is a world where access to politics and ability for public expression is systematically regulated in structurally violent ways. But speaking about Kashmir and those who are in Kashmir is a whole different level altogether. There are people, human rights activists, well recognized, whose homes are raided. There are journalists who are fearful. They are they're surveilled, and they know they are surveilled. They are fearful of what they can say, especially more so since the August 2019 events. And under those conditions, there's a million things to say there about the way in which there's an attempt to construct a certain idea of what people ought to feel and think, and a very typically colonial kind of winning hearts and minds, and that sort of thing that we know from history, that we know what's good for them, that kind of paternalism, the fear, the insecurity of a state and a government in not, and also legitimizing this, and this is again where the global part comes in. Everyone does it, and yes, sure, everyone does it. There's in Xinjiang, there's Hong Kong, there's Balochistan, there's a raft of places around the world where people are killed and disappeared, and where their internet is shut down, and where they're forced into various kinds of camps. But that doesn't make it right in any one of those places, right? And this is something that I feel that as part of people who are speaking truth to power, it's really important to have people understand this. People read, listen, hear and understand this. But it's I feel like I'm more pessimistic than maybe certainly than Vikram was. I mean, perhaps we have the little victories that in specific sets of kind of specific arenas that can be won, but I think this is a much longer, harder fight that isn't just limited to any one country, but in which India has a very kind of scary place, and I don't even know how you guys do it. The people that are part of journalism there are able to do this, because it's so unsafe to those listening to this. I mean, just look at the rankings of India in not just in the democratic context, but specifically in terms of violence against journalists. And to me, it's just been one whole scarring experience for over a decade now. I still won't forget the worst, kind of graphic sorts of violent threats. But now it's not even just organized, it's that trolling is, of course, that whole IT cell, and academics are targeted. There are not just Indian academics or Indian origin academics or Kashmiri academics, but other academics too. You would have read cases of academics in the US and other places who are currently being targeted very systematically by these sorts of insults, in the same way that overseas students of other countries in universities do that. It hurts our sentiments, that if you talk about Tibet, it hurts Chinese sentiments. If you talk about Kashmir, or if you talk about, kind of, if you say that there's a kind of structure of Brahminical oppression or something, then it's hurting Hindu sentiments. So it's that appeal to sentiments, that particular kind of weaponization that's playing a role. And all of this is, of course, deeply tied into processes of capital and investment. And here. So, but this is the systematic way in which this is now happening is, so to me, what was really interesting is that after, on the 4th of August, 2019, just the night before the changes in Kashmir, when I was leaving the Delhi airport, and obviously, everyone was worried about what was happening, but nobody knew exactly. I mean, I certainly didn't know exactly what the next morning would bring. So I was mid-air between Delhi and London when the changes happened, and when you suddenly woke up and you felt like your whole kind of sense of identity was fundamentally affected, and you had these people you couldn't contact and all of that. But I remember the immigration guy said to me, looking at my documents, since Akash mentioned OCI, he looked at my documents and said something about that he used to know, and this was really random. He used to know somebody who was also a professor and who had the same surname as mine, and who disappeared. It was really random. I was running late for my flight, so I haven't been back since because of Corona. But I have had people tell me that, it takes 10,000 rupees for a truck to run someone over. So it's even at a distance, there is no guarantee of safety because you live abroad. So I mean, I'll find out when I next plan to travel to Delhi or to Kashmir. But there is no safety, as as Arvind Subramaniam said in his resignation yesterday. Or day before, that it's a university, it's got private equity, it's a private university, and still it is not able to guarantee freedom of speech. So the idea I think that we can work with is that you are not necessarily going to be safe just because you are a man, or you are rich, or because you are in a private institution, or this is the once injustice gets something, and this kind of systematic injustice gets normalized, no one really is safe, whatever their location or education or anything else. So we are also doing it, as I said when I went to the US for that testimony, is that if we live in a democracy, we grow up in a democracy, and if we speak in a democracy, then speaking truth to power is an act that reduces, it's an act with positive externalities, because it reduces the risk for everyone. And somehow we have to just keep hammering that message through, and you guys are doing that, and so many others. But I hope that the optimism that I heard from some of my co-panelists is what wins, rather than how I feel, which is really pessimist about where this is all heading. And especially because I feel like this is globally relevant, that there are other places that are doing the same thing, not to the same extent, but these projects are feeding off each other, and our solidarities must also somehow feed off these lessons and make these connections. Thank you.
Thanks, Nitasha. I think we've kind of passed an hour quite quickly, and there are a lot of questions from the audience. So before passing on the mic to Hiba, I'll just make a couple of remarks that I kind of came to mind after hearing all of you. I mean, Nitasha, you were saying that there's a issue of a public sphere and subversion of within the law. But I remember also Dr. Ambedkar's assertion that India, for example, or as a subcontinent, historically has not had a public sphere, because we've always been divided by caste. And even after independence, a lot of the media and communications infrastructure went straight from the colonial control to Indian big capital control. And after liberalization, that big domestic capital control has been supplemented by international capital. So even today, historically, the media and communication sector has a problem in terms of representation, ownership over the means of producing information, which is why, I mean, like academia, media and communications and academia are two big sectors that produce cultural capital, right? And both of them are dominated by dominant castes. So you can see this in the way Disha Ravi was covered and Nodeep Kaur and Shiv Kumar were covered. So those fault lines, I think, will continue to haunt us for a long time. And if, to address the question that Akash was asking, that if the few dissenters who are there in the media, if they are harassed or targeted or arrested, how many people will come out? I think the answer lies in that historical fault line, which perhaps might resemble fault lines in South Africa or Brazil or the UK, but this Indian subcontinent has its own historical specificity in terms of caste and in terms of the political economy of media and communications. So I'll leave it at that, and perhaps
I'll just quickly put in a word here. It's a very important point that you mentioned. I just because I have a very strong feeling about this, because it's come on to me as well, that this whole upper caste controlling media, the best, and of course historically it is true, but in today's day and age, it is not true. Because today what you're seeing is the rise of Ambedkar caravan, the Dalit voice, the Shudra. What is happening is that, see, when we started doing political satire, it was a non-existent entity in India, right? And we started a YouTube channel. So we were technically outcasts also. Nobody would dare to touch even today, nobody would dare to touch a political satire show on television. So that means that we are absolutely off the table. No Netflix, no OTT, no television channel. And we are absolutely happy being on YouTube and on digital. What we are seeing is that if there are entrepreneurial people, hardworking people, you can now make a mark on digital. You do not need the traditional capital. You do not need the intellect. You need basic hard work, basic camera skills. It is not rocket science anymore. And it is great to see more voices come up. Unfortunately, of course, what is going to happen is the government is now hammering down on the entire digital ecosystem. Otherwise, you would see the rise of very many interesting voices, marginalized voices on digital.
Yeah, but just to add to that, I would just wanted to say that this is the byproduct of the whole total invisibilization of the issues of the marginalized. If I were to compare, say, issues of, say, religious minorities, more specifically the Muslims, or issues related to the Dalits or Adivasis, I have had friends, Dalit friends, telling me that even when there are cases of violence on Muslims, it's still a glamorous story to report about. The media entirely has stopped even reporting on, say, sexual violence stories, discrimination stories, stories of oppression on Dalits, and this total marginalization. So I think even the rise of, say, Shudra or other such platforms, I mean, though they will take maybe a lifetime to become mainstream, this is a byproduct and a direct result of this whole upper caste occupation on this whole media mainstream sphere. Even, let's be honest, Akash, even in this digital sphere, I mean, I don't want to name people by their caste names, but look at these individuals who have started these independent media ventures, or I would say, even for that matter, these news websites for that matter. Not, I mean, I would say more than 80% of them are elite, are upper caste. They have come from the mainstream media, so they had all of that social capital to even hold on to it, to sustain themselves. So let's accept this, that maybe one Shudra or one Dalit Dastak cannot really counter 99% of media, which completely invisibilizes, completely excludes the very existence of Dalits and our tribal people. So again, coming from I mean, we all have an identity location. Coming from a religious minority background, I would say that still the cases of violence and oppression are still reported about Muslims, or even for that matter, Christians. But the normalization, the sheer brutality of the normalization of the violence and exclusion of our Dalits and tribals is something, I think, it's a story that we have to tell more. Despite the fact that even I feel I have a show called Hum Bhi Bharat, which means we too are India. And the whole idea of starting a show was to do a counter narrative and give space to the issues of the marginalized communities. But it's very difficult to even sustain, because what happens is, for people like me with such limited resources, it's so difficult to go out in the field and collect stories firsthand. So what happens is that I also look at newspapers for ideas, and then I would analyze, I would send my reporters, but there are not enough people reporting on the issues of Dalits and marginalized and tribal people. So I think this is a story which we really need to talk more than we are.
Yeah. If I could also just briefly come in on one of the points that Dr. Kaul was mentioning about, should you be optimistic or pessimistic? And look, I think let's not, far from being optimistic, I think you should not, the extent of the challenges that exist, especially in parts of the business, especially in the mainstream areas like television, far from being even remotely optimistic, I think I would be more pessimistic than anybody can imagine that it is ever going to be able to pull itself out of the hole. I guess the question for all of us is, look, this is what is happening. We are where we are. You can either say, this is what is happening, this is the state of television, and we're going to somehow try and manage within this. This is the nature of digital, and yet it's not doing too many of these things, it's not telling the story. That's one possibility. Or then do we try and find some sort of solutions? And those solutions, I don't think are going to be easy to find. But I think it is incumbent upon all of us to at least try. It's incumbent upon us to try. Now, if somebody says, Akash, you're asking the question, you gave up something which was big in mainstream television, you're saying, okay, I'm going to now sit and try and set something else up. You're doing something very similar. Arfa is trying to do something similar. A lot of people are trying to do it. It's not because you necessarily think it's going to work. It's not easy to go up against big entrenched media powers that there are, especially with the sort of money that they command. But I think you've got to try. Can we try and tell video stories in a manner that is not entirely opinionated? Can you try and separate fact from views? Can you try and separate news from views? Can you try and have a level at least, or try to have unbiased information out there? Because otherwise this is going to keep growing. And just to take what Dr. Kaul was saying about some of the global problems, let's remember some of the issues that you're facing in India are about echo chambers, about everyone preaching into small committed rooms. It is being reflected elsewhere also, and the algorithms, and as you lead more and more stuff to the algorithms, that's going to happen. So I don't know. I don't think there are any easy answers to this. So, but I guess for all of us who are on this conversation, we all have to sort of start scratching our head and saying, okay, can we make a difference? What can we do? Because the alternative really is to just give up all hope, and that's a rather sad place to be.
Yeah,
Especially on
sorry.
World Happiness Day.
I didn't mean to kind of be the pessimist here. In fact, my name means ever renewing hope. No, I just, I completely agree with all of you. I just think that we need to have more of connecting the dots across this happening in different professions. So, so that if we're not thinking just that it's the judges, it's not just the media, it's not just the academics, and instead, and in addition to speaking about specific, kind of not disciplinary, specific sectoral challenges, we should also have these connections across those sectors, across the professions, to kind of find ways of overcoming this. Because partly I think that this isn't just about there not being enough correct information or enough facts. What is interesting about these hegemonic kind of totalitarian aspiring projects is that it's not just that the facts isn't there, it's that people don't care whether something is true or not, to go back to our end. It's, you may have the facts, but people can have very good strategies for dealing with cognitive dissonance. The system tells them something, the report that they like tells them something, they know the fact, they can experience something else, but they will have a narrative which will bind those two together and make them think that the fact that they encounter doesn't matter. So the strategies for dealing with that are about giving more information, but not just about giving more information, but also to kind of think of how can persuasion and critical thinking, rather than just more information, matter. On the issue of caste, I mean, this is something that people had also tweeted about in to LSE SU when they first tweeted about this panel, and I think that it's the context that matters and who's saying it. Because if Dr. Bhatt, if Ram is saying this, it has a different meaning than than somebody who believes in, kind of staunchly believes in kind of toxic nationalist Brahminical patriarchy, but then finds it important to voice the issue of caste when somebody is challenging the suppression of media freedoms. And I think that the Right Wing Project has been very effective in kind of mobilizing and manipulating the pre-existing structural hierarchies and presenting themselves as the kind of the counter to it, while at the same time entrenching them further, not just in elections. They do that in elections, as we saw in the northeastern states, but they also do that in in public sphere discussions, in the ways in which they use the issue of caste. But I agree with Arfa totally, that there's this way in which the historically resilient caste hierarchy, structural violence, patriarchy, all of those things, and the way in which they intersectionally play a role. So, there are people who are multiply and intersectionally affected by these identities. And we should be able to have these conversations without this being about, oh, well, you guys are all liberals who haven't got the experience of a certain kind of system. I think that identity politics is really important, but not just kind of some naive version of identity politics where you're just, you're kind of some automatic container simply because of your name or your, kind of identity. You just are right or are wrong, because those are journeys that you arrive at, rather than so this naive identity politics is a problem, which is why you can have black or brown people here that might just kind of totally support right-wing projects and say, well, we don't want to teach critical race theory, and see, I'm right about this because I'm actually not white. So there's kind of a whole lot of complexities here that need to be addressed. But of course, coming from you, that is a different thing than coming from a troll who has a kind of a right-wing flag.
So just a little more thing, and I hope I'm not delaying the Q&A. Just to add to what Dr. Nitasha and also what Vikram, both of them have said, that so for me as a working functional journalist who likes to go to field more often, just to also know how, what kind of reflection and also reaction to my work and also digital media as a whole. I would say there are days of optimism and there are days of pessimism. So just to share a story which should cheer you all up, that I went to Western UP to cover this whole farmers protest, and there was this Mahapanchayat which was taking place. I come from Western UP and I know everything that is wrong with Indian male, or I would say Indian people, North Indian people in general, is wrong with Western UP. They are highly patriarchal, they are anti-minority, they are very, very feudal, they are anti-women extremely, and we've had a history of communal violence. I mean, we've been one of the worst affected regions of India in terms of communal violence. So in, I would say, ordinary days, I wouldn't really dare to go with my name and face, which is, I'm a marked person and, my face is recognizable because that's part of my job, that I have to appear in front of the camera. In normal, I wouldn't really dare to go there to Western UP to cover some incident. I went there to cover the farmers' protest with a lot of apprehension whether I should or I shouldn't. I took one of my colleagues, Ajoy Ashurwad, with me and a camera person. So we were like team of 3 people, including one driver. So 4 people, if that kind of made me feel any safer about the fact that I should go there or not. Trust me that there were dozens of people who not only recognized the fact that we were one of those very few people, platforms, and I was one of those very few journalists who were covering the farmers' protests. They were kind of struggling with each other, fighting with each other, that who eventually is going to take us home to feed us. So this is like one of the things that, you get. So not that nothing is changing, because of these protests, whether this was anti-CAA and now these farmers protests, because we cannot look at media just in isolation. We also have to look at it in like holistic political and social picture. So I just want to inform you, and this is something I think we should cheer us all, that these are and this is a very core, support group for Mr. Modi, and they were so wounded and broken and heartbroken that we were the ones who elected this man, not just once, but twice to the chair of the prime minister. And this is what he's doing to us. There was a man who walked up to me and saying, Madam, main aapse bahut nafrat karta tha. I was the one, who would write, I wouldn't say all of these abusive words. He said, I used to write all those abusive words, right, in your YouTube videos. And now I've realized when you were covering the CAA protests, and now I'm the same person who is now totally transformed, because I know that this woman did not just cover the protest led by Muslims, but she's also covering the protest led by the farmers. And I am one of the farmers. So, this is, I don't know how many people are like that farmer hater of mine, who I don't know what does he think about me anymore. But I'm just saying that the things are changing with every movement that is led by people themselves. It changes a lot more than we can actually report about.
Thanks to all of you. I mean, obviously there's lots more to say, very thought-provoking, but I am aware that I have eaten up into the Q&A. So I'll, without any further comments, I'll hand it over to Hiba and to take over for the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt, and thank you for this thoroughly engaging and enlightening first round of our discussion. I'm already receiving messages from my friends here at LSE that this has been so amazing, and it is clearly evident from the number of questions we have received so far. In the interest of time, I would like to request all our panelists to please keep their response brief because we are flooded with questions. I'd start with, this is open to everybody. It's a question from Mr. Gaurav Bharadwaj, and he asks, if I watch Wire, my recommendations would be News Laundry and TheDeshBhakt. But if I watch Op India, my news bubble would be of similar websites. So one of the problems is the algorithm where you're being recommended similar stuff. It's like how Netflix works. So how do you think that, is it possible to reach out people on the other side, or how is it possible to break this barrier?
Okay, I'll just quickly step on this one because it's the most common question, by the way, that you get. What about this other side? What about this balance? So the thing is that if you watch Op India, then congratulations to you. The algorithm is not supposed to educate you, and it is not supposed to inform you or enlighten you. You have made that choice, and it will give you more of the same. I'm sorry, but that's how algorithms work. And a lot of people will then say, but no, but this is an echo chamber that you are in. You are not reaching out. First and foremost, this is not a white man's burden that you have to reach out to the other side, that you have to reach out to somebody who's blind, somebody who has bigoted, and that we have to educate him and bring him up from his, from his downtrodden, uncivilized state like the Britishers used to with the white man's burden. If being in an echo chamber which is filled with facts is an echo chamber, I'm happy being in an echo chamber of facts. I'm happy. So the people have to ultimately make a choice. I think this is a very, very sad argument to make, is that no, but I am not being recommended. You want to watch the good things are out there. The tragedy is that people are not wanting to watch good things. They are still going to watch the bad things.
Okay, can I just jump in on that a little bit? Because this has been the crux, actually, Akash, what I've actually spent 3 years of my life sitting and trying to figure out. All those books behind me, which are dealing with algorithms, was essentially just to try and find an answer to that. Very soon after I set up Heritage, it's created the most beautiful algorithm. It would give you exactly the videos that you wanted to watch. It would create a playlist, lovely videos, entirely social dilemma, and our traffic was up through the roof. Right? It was doing really well. And then you know what we did? We broke it. Why? Because I said there's something wrong here, because you're going to keep on seeing videos which are of a particular point of view. And if you're trying to give people informed, you should try and give people a different range of stories. So fundamentally, I mean, I won't take too much time and give you the full thing of what we did, but our answer was, our news stories are just simple 30-second pieces of fact. Both sides can agree on it. All sides can agree on it. This is something that had happened. And we put those out with a certain amount of human filtering in that. So the humans and the algorithms work in parallel at Heritage. And then anybody can add their opinion to that fact and then share it. So that's where the opinion comes from. So this is the way we try to do it. Facts are this and are completely flat, the facts. Now put your own opinion on it and share it. So that's basically how we are trying to fix it. I won't go into more details.
I also wanted to make a quick intervention here, because this is something I've been working on. I think it's crucial to realize that the binary between offline and online is perhaps a bit false, because there's no blank subject who starts interacting with the online space. A person's offline universe is often seen to some extent in their online interactions, right? So I think what is important to do is to have a culture of critical media literacy from a very young age. Engage with younger people on what it means to understand media as a system of representation. No media is neutral. So to understand how power is inbuilt into the logic of representation, how certain interests are promoted, certain interests are excluded, and empower individuals to make up their own mind, thinking about the media as a whole. That's the only kind of, I would say, sustainable social solution. I don't have much faith in kind of technical solutions. So that's my 2 pence.
I completely agree with you, Ram. I was about to say two of these things that I think I would make the world a better place. I think all politicians should have to undergo some kind of psychology tests to make sure that they have personalities that are not, kind of pathologically problematic in the interests of governing a country. But I think the second one is this bit about critical media literacy. It's right, it's not just something that people can know. It's like any other thing. You have to be able to discriminate between what you trust and what you don't. And that is something like any other skill. It should be taught to children from a very early age, given the kind of media saturated environment that people live in, that this is what it is. This is how you know whether to trust or not trust something, and how to build multi-perspectival objectivity, and to know that there are different perspectives. That doesn't mean that all perspectives are right. It also does not mean that there are perspectives that are not worth including. It's like when people say, well, you have to teach everything, but you don't teach the fact that murder is right. You don't teach the fact that sexual violence is right, or any of those things. There are things that are, there are lines, and knowing that, as well as how to discriminate between competing perspectives, is something that children should be taught. And maybe somebody, I don't know what your project kind of dimensions are, but maybe somebody should do this as a pilot thing, like just just with young children for them to be
Yeah,
able to.
we are doing it in multiple states of India.
Oh,
So
that's great.
I keep you posted.
And one of the questions in the Q&A board just asked me about the title of the book. So so the concept that I was referring to is agnotology. It's work from philosophy of science that looks at the ways in which power is served by deliberately maintaining ignorance, how ignorance can be maintained and perpetuated. And it's a, in a sense, it's in resonance with the kind of work that, as I said, Chomsky and Herman had earlier did about how media has filters about ownership, about sources, about concentration and so on. So it's that kind of work that looks at how information, the regulation of perception and the control of information and the management of information is actually not just accidental. The system is doing precisely what the outcomes are what have to be. So it's a the book is called Making and Unmaking of Ignorance.
Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. And this is again open to everybody. It's from Devashri. And she asks, do you think there may be a rise in situation of non-linear warfare like in Russia, wherein the government, by controlling media through these new IT rules, wants to ensure that the public is in a constant state of confusion, where narratives are tweaked and changed every now and then? I understand this
Well,
is like...
I think this is already happening. If I can take that question up, this is already happening. Like I'll give you an example of this very recent case. This is developing while we talk. Like there is a call for violence tomorrow in Ghaziabad, the Dasna village of Ghaziabad. There is a lot of mobilization, and we are already filing a report, and I'm sure it must have been published on the wire by now. A reporter had gone there to check what exactly is happening on the ground. So this is already taking place. Like I'll tell you, when this Muslim boy, he tried to enter the temple where it was written in, bold letters that Muslims are not allowed to enter the temple. So this guy said that he was illiterate, so he couldn't read what was written there. And he said previous days, like previously he's been to the same temple and he was able to take water before this head priest was changed to this new guy who was extremely violent. And so I'm saying, so the new narrative is that this guy is this small boy, teenager, is not an innocent boy. He was a thief. He was trying to steal something from the temple, and that is why he was beaten up. So there is a large section of people who are actually believing in this new theory now, because they want to counter this whole sympathy wave. So like I would say any right-thinking Hindu, or for that matter, even the right-wing Hindus, who are not very violent, who do not really advocate genocide of Muslims, who still may be very religious people, maybe voters of, say, the BJP, but still are decent human beings, who said, no, this is not right, and do not do this in the name of my religion. So to counter that whole sympathy wave, now this whole new theory was weaved, and this theory now is being acceptable to a whole lot of people. This name was trending, this whole theory was trending on Twitter for the last 48 hours, that this guy was actually a thief. So what I'm trying to say is not that we have to wait for some more time for this to develop, that we turn this whole largest democracy of the world into one big black hole, but it is already, we are there.
The report recommendations actually include in that article I was referring to earlier. The report recommendations actually have statements like the news should consist of true and false things, and there's a kind of annotation there to say is it being deliberately suggested that there be falsities inserted into the news. So this is, again, I'll go back to this. This is part of how to, when people start to realize something, how that can be countered. It's all really sophisticated and meticulous. It is, of course, very petty, as Akash said, but it's also like it's a very carefully crafted part of a project, and it's not just the way in which they counter these sorts of things. And two things that I think are useful for them. One is what I call the discourse of competing victimhoods. So it's like when somebody is being recognized as having been, their rights having been violated, and the point is, well, your rights can't be violated as much as someone else's rights. And I see this a lot, of course, in the case of Kashmir, different kinds of Kashmiris, Kashmiri Pandits and Kashmiri Muslims, but also in Kashmiri discourse versus the Indian discourse. And then it comes to, well, you're all XYZ is just liberal, and you just care for the problems of those who are like you, and you don't. So it's I mean, I think one one useful intervention for, in kind of media would be to kind of keep these different things which are not easily reconcilable in focus and spotlight at the same time. So there's this injustice and there's that injustice, and then there's this other injustice, and the perpetrators may not necessarily be in a neat hierarchy, but these are all injustices. And I think that would be one way of thinking about how we can kind of have solidarities to kind of create more, to create kind of more care, but also a greater sense of a better answer to the question of what are we proud about? Because I feel like all of these really toxic people are just proud about the wrong things. It's not wrong that they want to feel a pride in their identity or in their country or in their position, but what they're proud about is just so problematic and so wrong that,
No, to take Dr. Kaul's point forward, see, this whole thing about Kashmir versus India, and how people are treated in Kashmir and how people are being treated in India. See what a beautiful job this government has done of integrating the situation in Kashmir with the situation in India. You used to cut off the internet in Kashmir, now you're cutting off the internet in Delhi. You used to take away power in Kashmir, Article 370. Now Arvind Kejriwal is also discovering how power can be taken away from Delhi with the new Delhi Act, whereby basically the Delhi government would be basically be made a puppet of the lieutenant governor. You had journalists being picked up in Jammu and Kashmir. You have journalists being picked up in the national capital as well. So from internet being suppressed to rights being suppressed to journalists being picked up, just see the level of integration that has happened. So yeah, so we are heading there. One nation.
And they call it Kashmirization of rest of India, not the Indianization of Kashmir, but the Kashmirization of rest of India. And I remember that BJP MLA from UP, I think Muzaffarnagar, who said you can go to Kashmir now, buy plots and marry white women, white Kashmiri women, gori ladkiyan. But that did not happen. But on the contrary, all civil rights and liberties, all of this is taken away. Kashmirization of India.
And one of the most common statements you get these days is, we now understand what it is being like a Kashmiri. A very common comment on my YouTube thread. Now we get it. I said, good. Now you get it.
I'm really sorry to kind of sound this note again here, because but I have to tell you that I completely understand the place that you're saying this from, but I wouldn't be surprised if the response, and I'm not necessarily, I'm sort of ventriloquizing the response here, that the response you would get from people who are either Kashmiris or part of that kind of spectrum, they would say, well, it's not the same. They would say that you think it's the same, but you don't actually have, people being blinded. You don't have people who don't have their relatives, disappeared and no accountability. You don't have those random things, that hundreds of things that have happened for such a long time. So you think that it's the same, but that's not the same. They would say that. And then they would also say, well, it's not just the BJP, because, the torture centers, the 90s, all of that it's not just the BJP, it's part of your state. And I would say to that actually both based on what you're saying and what they're saying actually represent moves in understanding. And I can kind of find ways of empathizing with these two voices, because as a way of kind of learning and understanding that, this is about how politics functions in the context of territorial disputes between post-colonial nations, where the kind of agency of people who are inhabiting a region is not taken into account. But that's complicated, and that'll take like three extra minutes, and nobody will have the patience for it. But so it'll be like you're the separatists and the anti-nationals and the terrorists, and you're the liberals and the fake people, and that's sadly the tragedy. But I'm just kind of just laying it out there that that's how it would play out in media. That's what it would be.
Thank you for your comments. I will just take just two more questions, because I'm so sorry we don't have a lot of time. I'm very sorry to our viewers. The next question is for Mr. Vikram Chandra. It's from Mr. Gaurav Bherwani. He asks, television model doesn't work anymore. Digital seems to be growing despite the growing pressures. Do you feel the voice of the digital platforms can become a lot more stronger if they come together under one common platform? And is the development of an OTT platform model dedicated purely to accommodate content and live news from digital news platforms change the way new content is consumed? I hope.
I mean, yes, So first of all, and I keep this really short so you can maybe get another question. Absolutely. The era of television news, I believe, is the TV news has been deteriorating for a long time. Every time I'm at a gathering like this for 5 years, I've been asking people, how many of you think TV news is unwatchable? And most of the time, everyone raises their hand. So if TV news is thriving, an alternative eventually has to come in video news. And I think the last 1 year, this pandemic has created so much chaos all around the world, but I think it has also shown how models can change really fast. So digital is going to be here, streaming is going to be here, OTTs is going to be there, new forms of content consumption will be here. Is the answer going to be on our fingertips tomorrow or today, or do I know exactly what the answer is today? I don't. But somewhere answers will be found. One thing I'm reasonably sure of is the answer is not television.
Thank you so much. And just one last question, and I'm asking personally. If you have to give one advice to our viewers today who want to venture in the field of media or academia, what would it be? And this question is also for Dr. Bhatt.
Sorry, what was the question? I didn't get it.
Any advice that you would like to give to, the students of LSE who are listening, our viewers today, who want to venture in this field?
I've done a little small stint in academia. I've done a small stint in the media trying to build community radio stations actually for most of my career. So the only advice I have to give is not get too bothered by the macro situation. I think when you get hands-on, there's always people who will show you solidarity and always some set of challenges which you can. The thing is to get out and get your hands dirty. I think India is too big for a totalitarian kind of society to percolate down to the roots just yet. So I would say there's lots more time. And it's a good opportunity to get out there and get your hands dirty. That would be whether it's an academic knowledge production or it's in media production.
Dr. Bhatt, I have an alter ego character called Bhakt Banerjee. He'll take you up on that challenge. Whether it has percolated down enough and whether it can be authoritarianly controlled or not, getting there perhaps. Hiba, very quickly, I get this question a lot. I have been a former journalist. I call myself a former journalist is because I gave up television in 2012. I have been a satirist. I've been a radio person, a radio executive. My answer is very simple. Talk to 10 people. After 10 people tell you that there is no money, there is death threats, there is insult, there is no clear career growth opportunity. After hearing all of this negativity, you still want to do this? That's the kind of person that will survive as far as journalism is going to be concerned. Academia, yes, but again, please understand these are very limited spheres. My only advice to people who might be looking at this is you are looking at people, the three people you're talking to are all digital. I think I am very, very lucky that I understood that, I made that switch. I consider myself very lucky. That's a separate thing that digital is coming under clampdown. But skills, upskill. There is no institute, there is no place that can teach you all of this. You have to learn it on your own. And one last point, there is nobody sitting waiting to pay you money for good journalism. The biggest challenge to journalism today is that some may want to consume it also, but they might not have the money. The problem is that a lot of people think that there is a sea of people waiting to consume good journalism. The sooner you get out of this misnomer, the better. Even academia, people are not waiting to read your research paper. How do you make good, serious content which is also consumable to a larger audience? Not comparable to the entertainment audience, but still a larger audience and be relevant. If you crack that, you're done.
Arfa, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I would say I would go with what Akash is saying. It's interesting that how three of us all came from television, and I would say I found like my real home in digital media, where I found I was accepted and acceptable the way I was. I didn't need to change for TV. I come from small town. Nobody asked me to look like this big city girl, this cosmopolitan girl. I am I want to look like, I want to speak in the language that's understandable by majority of the people. So there is no set formula that I adopt. Like you have certain templates for television. Vikram would know it well. He may have kind of made those templates that you are not supposed to be going beyond this. But in television, I followed all of that. But now here is my free space where I can be who I want to be. I can express the way I feel like, and there are no judges sitting on my head telling me this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And this is what is being celebrated on digital media. So I would say that future of journalism is India is alive. It's alive in people like me, Vikram, Akash, and several other people, maybe who you may not know, but you would know them tomorrow. I am very, very optimistic. I always see that silver line, and there is no other way. I'm saying for me, for maybe the people in the panel, or maybe the people who are asking questions, it may be an option to maybe escape all of this whole political environment. But for millions of our people who have always lived on the margins of Indian democracy and have further been marginalized, there is no other option but to be optimistic, but to see that silver line. And I would say I want to be that person who represents that. And the person who's asking this question, I would say you have to be the next person who takes up this kind of lamp and legacy from me and take it forward. There is no other way.
But just to add to that, if you got into digital late, it's because you don't listen to me often enough. I'm almost certain at a time when I used to run NDTV.com and you used to be on television, I remember coming to you and saying, why don't you write more Arfa and do more on digital for NDTV.com? And you said, karungi, and you never actually did it. So listen to me next time. I mean, look, the final, from my point of view, the answer to that question is, if you're going into journalism because you think it's going to be an easy life or a comfortable life or a well-paying life, forget about it. Glamorous life, no. Even in the heydays of television, in the heydays of journalism, right, the golden era when people say, oh, anchor, oh, it must be so good for you. You spend a lot of your time just standing on the pavement waiting for someone to come out and give you a soundbite. It was never comfortable. It was never an easy career. Today, far more difficult, far more challenging than at any time. But I will tell you this one story. When I was in England studying, and I said, okay, at that time I was saying, I was thinking I'm going to be a banker. And I said, no, I'm not going to be a banker. I'm going to come back to India and do TV journalism, although television journalism didn't exist. So it was just a question of passion. I think you've heard it from Akash and from Arfa. If you have that passion and you really want to do it, and you don't, and you're not expecting an easy life, and you're okay being picked up and being sent to jail a few days, great idea. Go for it. You won't get anticipatory bail though, not in India, but just telling you.
And also just adding a little, context to what we are talking about here. See, I am one of those people who've anchored and hosted shows from one of the most, expensive studios in India, one of the oldest newsrooms in India, and people who have kind of defined this whole idea of Indian TV journalism. I have been trained by those people. But now look at me, I went to West Bengal with me and my camera person. That's also a luxury that I have a camera person that I can take to, a different, I mean, I have the money to, because I have institutional support that I can, buy an air ticket. And I lived with a friend whose mother runs a homestay because I know I cannot, afford like a lavish hotel. And so I booked my air ticket. I, fixed my own accommodation. I did my own research. I was my own guest coordinator. I was my own reporter. After doing all of this, then I struggled a lot for at least 12 hours, how to transport all of this to Delhi office, and finally kind of worked out. So I am one person army doing everything, but trust me, I have never felt more accomplished than I am today. And the last assembly election in West Bengal in 2016, I had 25 people from Rajya Sabha television doing the same thing that me and my camera person together did. 25 people doing the live broadcast from Calcutta, the same place, from Kolkata, the same panel discussion. But I did better journalism 2021 than what I did with the support of 25 people from Rajya Sabha TV.
Okay, I know we're not likely about to end this, but just to add to that, Arfa, you remember all those years I used to do shows from that massive big fight studio with 30 people inside it and a PCR crew. Just before I started this LSE panel, 6:30, I was doing a show, sitting right here with this backdrop behind me on StreamYard on this computer. nobody else, one producer somewhere else. We did a panel discussion. I could tell you, you couldn't probably tell the difference between that and what the shows were that were being done there. So that's the democratization which digital does bring to you. So I completely agree with what Arfa said. You don't need a large organization behind you anymore. Not me.
Yeah, I'll agree with that techno optimism. I think that citizen journalism and the ability to have access to the modes of producing things does really make a difference to how people access information. My answer to Hiba, to your question is, I think for somebody in the media, I would say, well, from the perspective of somebody who's often in the media, though not watching TV, but actually being interviewed. So I would say that, Orwell's quote comes to mind, that you should, if your journalism is printing what somebody doesn't want to be read or heard, I'll add, everything else is public relations. So if you're doing something that's actually someone doesn't want to be out there, then you're bringing something to light. I would also say an important question generally in life to be aware of is, ki bono, who benefits from what you're doing? Who benefits from how things are? Because that's usually a clue to understanding how power works, what interests are being served by a particular framing, what is being drawn attention to. As for academia, I would say that the struggle and the thing that I always advise my students is that you have to, the real challenge in academia is to keep the balance between a moral compass and analytical insight, because it's very easy, especially in a kind of inexorable, if one is pulled by inexorable careerism, to kind of just sacrifice that, to just do the thing, to just play the game, to just take the safer option and just kind of give away to the moral compass. This is especially important when you write about things like when you analyze things like nationalist projects or subversions of democracy, or even border violence. I mean, that's kind of, when I say border violence, I mean refugees that die in seas and are tortured in camps. These are the sorts of things that are really hard. I mean, as an academic, if you want to actually put critical perspectives on these into peer-reviewed journals, I mean, I can assure you it's a horribly difficult process, because there are boundaries and there is a relation between knowledge making and death that I don't think is often enough in attention. Because what we don't talk about, you have, when I'm reflecting this, 20 years in academia, when you have a reviewer send you back a report, paper on border violence, somebody sends you back a referee report, and in which there's this line about, well, you're saying that these border technologies cause violence, and that, but sure, is that in itself a reason to oppose them? And you just think of the level of sanctioned ignorance and the kinds of deaths that happen, the kinds of identities that are receiving end of that violence aren't those identities that are creating knowledge about them. And that gap is very visible in academic knowledge production too, across a range of topics, because the people who are affected by that knowledge, whose lives are going to be governed by that knowledge, aren't the people usually who are creating that knowledge. So for me, the moral compass and the analytical insight and being able to kind of maintain that balance in that profession as an academic, I think is really important. Two last general things. One, thinking is an act. I keep telling people this. Thinking isn't something that just happens. Thinking isn't something that will happen if you don't actually give time to it. Thinking, and I don't mean just thinking about a thing because you have to think about it. I mean thinking just of things that you haven't thought of and why that matters. I think it's actually, thinking is an action. It's not just it's an important correlate of what we recognize as action, but it is also an action in itself, because it makes you examine how things relate to each other, what you are perceiving and why, and how that affects you and why not. So one, thinking is an action, and secondly, Thoreau, somebody I really like, this 18th century kind of transcendentalist, Henry David Thoreau, his line about not being a shoulder sitter. If you can't change the world, if you don't want to change the world, if you think it's too much of a burden, you don't have to, he says. Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience, because I feel like the giving of consent is a really vital act, and we need to think about the sorts of things we give consent to. So Thoreau in his civil disobedience essay says, well, you don't have to save the world. You don't have to do those things if you don't want to. Just make sure that you're not a shoulder sitter. And by that, he means just make sure you're not personally sitting on the shoulders of those who you oppress, and you're being able to be who you are is not connected to continuation of oppressions. And that in itself, I think, is also pretty radical. Even if you don't save the world, just make sure that you're not a shoulder sitter as much as possible. And we're all imperfect. So don't blame yourself if things don't work out. Just, find your happiness, however. So to whoever is the young person listening to this, that's what I would say.
Thank you for that happy note, Dr. Kaul. And thank you so much for all your answers and comments. We can continue this interesting discussion for another 2 hours, but I understand it's quite late in India. So this brings us to the end of our session. On behalf of Team LIF, I'm extremely grateful to all our panelists for this thoughtful and learning experience. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And I'm also personally thankful to you because you have been bearing with me and my emails for quite some time now. And thank you to everyone in our audience, especially for attending today's webinar. We appreciate you signing in and hope you leave the session with an insightful takeaway. Before I sign off, I would like to tell you about a panel discussion that is happening tomorrow at 2 p.m. GMT. It is the entertainment content event, our last and final for this year. We have a very exciting panel lined up with Rajkumar Rao, Aditi Rao Hedri, and others, so please do tune in. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a great weekend and keep safe. Thank you.